A very, very good afternoon. A warm welcome to Dan Really Likes Wine, brought to you by Norman Goodfellows. And welcome to another week of nerves if you happen to be South African. I was going to say a South African rugby fan, but I'm not sure there's anybody in South Africa who hasn't been swept away by last weekend's rugby and is now preparing for this weekend's game as we're into the semi-final stage. And in the case of me, looking for a little wine to calm the nerves. That is part of today's show. In fact, I'm going to get a suggestion from my guest as to what he might recommend. Last week, as part of my plan to get the Springboks through to back-to-back World Cup victories, I drank some 2019 Rust and Freda, partly because 2019 was the last time South Africa won the World Cup, and partly because Rust and Freda's owner, Jannie Engelbrecht, played for South Africa. So we go back to the last World Cup after that they won. That would be 2007. So this Saturday, some 2007 wine. What am I drinking? And who is it from? I'll take your recommendations and suggestions in the build up to Saturday. And we have had a few already this week. So rugby is on the mind. That links indirectly to today's guest, who I'll be introducing very shortly. An American who has got one of the standout names in New Zealand wine. What's he doing making wine in New Zealand? How did the Burnt Cottage project come about? Well, we'll find out from Marquis Sauvage, our very special guest on the show very shortly. In what is a busy week, a busy fortnight, not just for rugby, it is Standard Bank Winex with Michael Fridge on next week, and that means the winemakers are flocking north. It's like birds at the change of season. I spent some time earlier today with Brewer Raats. In fact, he and his wife Elfie are coming around for dinner this evening, our reigning South African Winemaker of the Year. According to Tim Atkin, he was launching his new MR de Compostela. I'll tell you a little bit more about that shortly. And then next week, we are spending time with everybody from Grootepoort to the entire Robertson Wine Valley, to Holdenmans, to I think Siemens are going there somewhere. Anyway, it's a huge pile of wine people. And we're also going to be doing a live show next week, next Wednesday evening, from the opening of Winex, where the very best of South African wine, the very best of South African winemakers come together for what is a comprehensive showcase of great South African wine. So if you're up in the Gauteng area next Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, some more details of that to follow in just a moment. So a very special guest, very excited to have him on the show. Before I introduce him, though, let's have a quick look at some of the latest wine news. This is coming up next Monday. Gerard Holden will be on his way up. He's in Durban at the moment. He'll be with me Monday evening at Norman Goodfellows in Fourways from 5:30. As always, there'll be some canapes alongside 6 of Gerard's wines, including his iconic Big G, the red blend that speaks so much to the character of the man, as well as to the character of the terroir of the Franschhoek estate. Do come and join us. 6 terrific wines to taste. A small fee, and all of that money goes to charity. And in return, you get me and Gerard some lovely wine and some great food. So that's Monday night. Coming up, the Holden Mads tasting at Norman Goodfellows. Then a little later on in the week, it is, as I mentioned earlier, Standard Bank Winex at the Sandton Convention Centre. Your tickets are available at Web Tickets. We'll be broadcasting live on Wednesday from 5 until 6. If you are around, you come and say hello and tell us what wine you've discovered, because even I find at Winex, thinking I know most of the wine in South Africa, always discover some brand new wines, some brand new labels occasionally that even I have not heard of, which I love discovering. And I would highly recommend, if you've got a free evening next week, getting along to Winex. The showcase will be huge. And one of the best parts about Winex is you get to meet a lot of the winemakers as well, which adds a rich dimension to the experience. 25, 26, 27 October. Tickets available at Web Tickets. And this was earlier on today, Brewer Raats. Now that wine on the right is the MR de Compostela, and it is I think the 16th vintage of what was South Africa's first ever premium red wine. Now, this was released, it was 350 Rand a bottle. That might not sound like a huge amount of money, especially today, but when it was released, the most expensive wine prior to that was 200 Rand a bottle, so almost doubled. Out came this Cabernet Franc-based Bordeaux blend made by Nzo Veve and Ratz, the Tim Atkin Winemaker of the Year for this year. And initially, a few eyebrows raised. What the heck are you doing charging that amount of money? Now it's closer to 2,000 rand a bottle, and it sells out very quickly indeed. The 2021 from a vintage that winemakers, especially with reds, are very excited about. It's a wine that you can drink now, and you wouldn't always have said that for one of our bigger wines in a Bordeaux style. But while you can certainly drink it now, this is one to stick away for a decade and more, and then revel in the richness and elegance and restrained power of a staggeringly good Stellenbosch red. We filmed with Brewer earlier today. That was at the Potluck Club, so look out for that on the magazine show coming up in the next few weeks. Okay, so it is a Rugby World Cup weekend. I thought I'd head off to New Zealand, and by New Zealand, I of course mean America, because today's special guest has Burnt Cottage in New Zealand. It is one of the most celebrated, most loved wine brands in New Zealand. But Marcus himself finds himself in a very different part of the world. Marcus, welcome to the show. Lovely to have you on. Thank you very much for joining us. A little earlier in the day, your time. Where do we find you?
You find me in Chicago, Illinois. So yeah, it's 10:08 here? Yeah, 10 in the morning. And I got the time right this time. So we're all set.
Well, an excellent time for the first glass of wine. So I hope you've got one nearby.
I've got coffee. I'm bad, but not that bad.
It's a fascinating story. It was Simon Crawley from Great Domains. He said, man, you have to get Marcus on the show. He's a great character, makes some really cool wines. He's got a fantastic story. So I'm glad we've made it happen. Tell me about this story. What is an American doing with a wine property in New Zealand?
I asked myself that, quite frankly, to tell you the truth, a lot. But I'm a wine distributor and importer in the U.S., so it all sort of does tie in and make sense. And I had me and my brother, we always wanted to own the romantic idea of owning a vineyard, which you realize once you do it is not that romantic. It's a lot of work. But we wanted to do Pinot Noir for sure. That was sort of the prerequisite of the whole idea. We looked around Oregon, looked at some things in the Willamette Valley, just could never find something that really did it for us. Sonoma, California, too prohibitively expensive. Even we purchased what is Burnt Cottage now in 2001. Burgundy, of course, again, despite my name, I don't speak French hardly at all. And again, expensive. And I went to look at a joint venture with Gary Farr, whose wines I love, and I love him, in Geelong in Australia. And I had never been to New Zealand. And my wife and I just stopped in New Zealand for a holiday and saw Central Otago, and really that was about the gist of it right there. And this piece of land became for sale and went to auction, and we wound up buying it. I bought it over the phone, I guess 6 months after we were back, and that was basically the start of it, and really all the planning there was to it, to tell you the truth. So that was it. It was kind of as a lot of things do that work out, it was just a total fluke.
I was talking to South Africa, German South African Lars Marker down in Cape Town last week, the owner of Bacon Verwachting. His father, a German tourist, got drunk the night before he was supposed to be flying home, bought the estate, and the family never left. Yeah. So there do seem to be these stories that do pop up about slightly unusual or somewhat unplanned acquisitions. You've got it. The initial romance, I'm sure, faded when you discovered how much work there was actually involved. But has there been an element of love to it, and has it ticked the passion box that you were hoping it would?
Oh yeah, I love it with all my heart. And the idea when we did it was I didn't have any kids, and being what I do as a day job as a distributor, I can kind of be there, and especially nowadays you can be anywhere. But the idea was to spend half the year in America and half the year down in Central Otago. But then you forget you have kids, and the school thing got in the way. So that kind of kiboshed that. But my daughter's got 3 more years left in school, and then the hope is to be in New Zealand more time. I'm down there. Well, pre-COVID, I was down there a lot. I've only been back once since COVID because they locked down pretty hard. But yeah, once we bought it, then it was kind of like, well, now what the hell do we do with it? I don't know how to because I don't make the wine. I know enough to be dangerous now, but So we enlisted Ted Lemon, who some of your viewers may know, of Literai in Sonoma, American guy, but who went to University of Dijon, and he was the first, and I think the only American still to manage a domain in Burgundy-Guiriot. He worked at Dujac. I worked for Christophe Roumier. So I badgered him enough. I'd known Ted since the, I guess, early 90s, and just kept badgering him. And he called me up one day and said, let's go down and take a look, and went down, and he came on board and he laid it all out, and that was it.
He is a celebrated winemaker indeed. You would have needed somebody like that to make the project work from so far away, from so distant. How difficult has it been to get things up and running and to keep an eye on them?
It's easier than you would think, because everybody on the ground there, we've been very, very fortunate. The team that we put in place have all been there for years now. Our original vineyard manager was Jared Connolly, and he left, and we thought, oh, now what the hell do we do? Because we're 100% biodynamic, so you've got to be, know somebody that knows biodynamics. And then we were fortunate enough to get Milton Estate trained. Shane Livingstone's our vineyard manager, has been now. God, it's probably been, I guess, 10 or 12 years now. I'm not for sure. And then Claire Mulholland, who's a fabulous winemaker in her own right, ex-Martinborough Vineyards, I guess, is her under Larry McKenna for years. And then Andy Crozier, from an English dude who manages all the export, import, all the business stuff. So I really, I kind of say sometimes I'm really kind of irrelevant. They're always, when I come down there, Ted used to always look at me, true story, in the winery, and be like, I'd be standing there, he'd be like, why don't you go do the punch downs? I'd be like, yep, you got it. That's what I'm good for. So.
Well, it gets the hands dirty, and gives you a bit of labor.
Yeah.
What about the wine itself? Because you spoke about the different areas you'd had a look at, and those areas don't all have the same kinds of grapes as their headline acts. Burnt Cottage, you've become known for your Pinot Noir. Was that simply, well, okay, this is what New Zealand's good at, this is what we'll make, or is there also a love of Pinot Noir that went into the story?
No, definitely love a Pinot Noir. I mean, Burgundy to me is like the end-all, be-all, holy grail. And I know people say that, and it's like a pompous, pretentious thing. For me, it's not. I just love Burgundy, and I love Pinot Noir. And hitting New Zealand and Central Otago specifically for what I like. I mean, I'm a ski bum, so I love the mountains. I love all that stuff. I went to school. I went to university in Colorado, so just all sort of spoke to me. And I quite frankly, I guess that was 2001. I wasn't familiar with hardly any of the wines of Central Otago. Felton Road, who I love, and those guys are awesome and helped us out tremendously, and still do. It's the only wines I was familiar with, and just started. I tasted more of those when I was down that first trip. A lot of other wines, Gibson Valley, Ripon, stuff I'd never heard of. And I was like, geez, these are really bloody good wines. And I thought, and I still think they're even more so now. They kind of straddle that bridge between old world and new world. They're not, they're not in your face, in a new world sort of, over extracted, over alcohol style, which that style has its place. But I just like a more subtle, more sort of, I guess, transparent wine. And I think Central Otago, you can do that. Because the climate is so, I mean, that's the downside to the climate's so severe, and you can get handed, frost at harvest with the bird nets on, and it can be a giant, pardon my French, a pain in the ass, but it's it's all worth it in the end.
The introduction that you've had, and it's more than an introduction now, you've had a fair education of wine in New Zealand, coming from the broader wine industry with Maverick Distribution, going over to New Zealand. What are the key things you've learned about New Zealand wine in particular, the world of wine in general, by suddenly becoming the man behind Burnt Cottage?
In New Zealand, I mean, specifically, that it's not just Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc, which I don't know. I've been to South Africa a couple of times, but I don't know. I mean, in the U.S., I mean, that's kind of what still New Zealand is known for, is Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc. And there's all these other great regions, great wines. There's great wines you wouldn't expect in New Zealand. I mean, there's great Syrah, from Hawke's Bay. Ottaurangi does a Syrah that you don't really see outside of the country that is just brilliant from Martinborough. Riesling's Pinot Gris. the Cabernet and Cabernet blends from Waiheke Island, which is an island off the coast of Auckland and Hawke's Bay. So things like that. That's what's really kind of sparked me. And they're because of their climate situation. I mean, most of them are maritime climates. Central Otago is the only continental climate within New Zealand, but the rest of them are maritime. But it's still, you're still on the edge pretty much, everywhere with their different issues. So they're they're always, I don't say they're always, but they're picked at a lower bricks a lot of times. So they're more subtle than like a New World wine from the U.S.
In creating this Pinot Noir space that you have so successfully, have you managed to shift a few perceptions in America? Is that it's all about Sauvignon Blanc belief being chipped away at bottle by bottle of Pinot Noir?
Yeah, we definitely have. I mean, our first commercial vintage was 09. And at first, when we started out, we manage our own distribution in the U.S. and it was tough getting representation because nobody was like, well, you're a Central Otago Pinot Noir and you're expensive, but it's 100% biodynamic. There's no intervention, no acidification, no chapelization. So it's everything's done right. It's not a cheap undertaking to do for us. So that was a hurdle at first, but once people started to discover more and more, and people would, really was the old school work of going out and I did all the distributor tastings out, beating the streets, tasting, and then the word of mouth just got big enough. It just finally got there, and I think now I feel like in the U.S. that well, not even just New Zealand Pinot Noir, but Pinot Noir from other parts of the world, even from like South Africa, like, Hamilton Russell and Bouchard Felinson, which, I've always loved those wines. But 10 years ago, 15 years ago, nobody would have known in the U.S. what the hell any of those were. And I mean, I don't see Bouchard nowadays as much as I used to here, but I see Hamilton Russell around, a fairly amount. So I think that, the American consumer, probably driven with the internet and social media and that you can find anything, is becoming more aware that there's wine outside of the U.S. in places like New Zealand and South Africa. So
I want to ask you a little later about the South African awareness and how much that is growing. But sticking with New Zealand for just a moment, just having a look at some of the pictures of Burnt Cottage, knowing Otago for the little I visited through there. I spent a bit more time in some other parts of the country, but kind of wherever you go to New Zealand, it's Lord of the Rings territory all over the world. It is staggeringly beautiful. And if it just didn't take 7 months to get there, I think we'd all spend a bit more time going over to visit.
And you guys take about 8 months for me to get there, so you're farther.
And when you go over there, is it still a case when you touch down that sweeping beauty of New Zealand takes your breath away?
It absolutely. I mean, even there's something about living in. I'm not from Chicago originally, but I'm from rural Kansas originally. So I was born on a farm at 1,500 people in a town, but Chicago with 9 million people around you, you land in Auckland, and Auckland is still, it's the largest city in New Zealand, but it's a million. I don't know how big. Well, I know Joburg's big. I don't know how big Cape Town is, but there's I think there's a million and a half people in Auckland, so it's still not that big. So you land, and I've landed. True story is more than not. I see people in the airport that I know. Or I used to have a New Zealand cell phone before the days where stuff was inexpensive for roaming and stuff, and I'd turn on as soon as I get there, my phone would start ringing, and somebody'd be like, "Yeah, I hear you're here," and I'm like, "Well, how in the hell do you know I'm here? I just landed." Like, "Well, such and such saw you at the airport," and then everywhere you go, it's just in Central Otago is just it for me because of that, like you said, the Lord of the Rings things, the mountains, and the scenery. But every part of New Zealand just got this crazy scenery, and it's just I feel like that I'm lucky that it just feels like a second home for me, really, whenever I get there. So yes, I still have that feeling. I was just there, like I said, before I came back. My last trip was there in February 2020, before all hell broke loose with COVID, and I did not go back till I was there last December, I guess.
You can see from that picture just how gorgeous a part of the world it is. You say with great conviction that you've taken it on as a second home, which leads to probably the most important question of this entire conversation, Marcus. It's got nothing to do with wine. It's got to do with the religion of New Zealand, which is, of course, the game of rugby. Have you embraced it?
Well, you missed the part that I'm American. We have this thing over here. I don't know what you guys call it, gridiron too. We call it football, but so that's sort of, I'm always marveled. It's like these guys do this crap without pads. I'm like, to me, it just looks. I mean, I wouldn't even have attempted it as a kid. I don't think growing up in Australia, South Africa, or New Zealand. My dad did business in Australia, so I grew up. As a kid, a little bit in Moree in New South Wales, Australia. So I never really understood rugby. I mean, I got to know that there's rugby union and rugby league, which I don't even know what the difference is nowadays. But I know there's these All Blacks things that you see, but it's on my bucket list to go see an All Blacks game, but I have not seen it yet. I was supposed to go. They played the United States here in Chicago at Soldier Field, and I was out of town the day they were here. So, I like it. I'm marveled by it. I don't fully understand it. It looks just, I just happened to flip by, I think it was last week. It must've been part of the World Cup. It was Ireland versus Scotland. And I stopped because my wife, she's born here, but she's 100% Irish. And so I stopped on it and I'm like, Jesus, it's just mind boggling to me.
Well, I'll tell you what, you get your South African trip planned, and we'll see if there's a rugby match we can get you along to.
I'd be in. I've been around them all the time. I was in Wellington once, and it was just packed in Wellington, New Zealand. I'm like, what the hell is going on? And they had the sevens going on is what they had. So, and I didn't have time. I would have loved to fit one in there. That's the thing. When I go to New Zealand, though, it's usually just, boom, 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 boom. And, the people tell me, well, did you do this? Did you see this? Did you go to Franz Josef Glacier? And I'm always like, no. Because I don't, I feel like, the Lord, because they do all these Lords of the Rings tours around Central Otago. I mean, a lot of them are 20 minutes from our vineyard. And I'm like, I've never done that. So.
All right, so rugby to see when you're back in New Zealand next, but also, of course, continuing this wine story, headlined by Pinot Noir. For people who maybe haven't had Pinot Noir from New Zealand, they've possibly tried it from South Africa, had some Burgundy, maybe even had some from somewhere like Oregon. What is it for you that gives not just your wine, but generally the Pinot Noir of your region in New Zealand, the distinction that elevates it to the wine that it is?
The big thing for me is Central in general. And there's arguments of where it comes from. It always has like this wild time. Not always, but a lot of them have like a wild time herbaceousness character. And that I don't know where, in all honesty, where it comes from at all, but they all seem to have that. And they all seem to have like a savory character. Probably climate driven. Most of them are, again, they're reserved because it's hard to get. Most of ours are natural alcohol, and we don't chaptalize or water back or anything. It's, we're like anywhere from 12.5%, 13.5% alcohol. So they're lower alcohol. So again, they're more of an old world style, but yet they've still got an overt fruitiness, which in all honesty, when we started in Central Otago, we wanted to try to tame. I think they were pronouncing that overt fruitiness a little too much. Where they were sort of like fruit bombs. And I think they were described, for most people at that time, there was kind of like the Barossa Shiraz of Pinot Noir. And now, everybody's figured out to tone that back a little bit. And they're just more subtle and more transparent. I think, again, back to South Africa, I think guys like Hamilton Russell, I think they balance that border too as well between an old and new world Pinot Noir.
And in terms of the aging potential in South Africa, I think we're often guilty of drinking the softer and gentler red grapes, the Pinots and the Cinsaults and the Grenaches a little young, because you can drink them young and they've got the brightness of fruit and the softness of touch to allow that. But if you do get hold of an older bottle of Hamilton Russell or Storm or Beauchard Finlayson or Newton Johnson, one of those Hamiltonada classics, you do get a rich reward. How does that apply to the Pinot Noir of Otago?
I think it's the same. And we didn't, specifically for Burnt Cottage, we had no idea how it was going to age. And I hadn't had a lot of the back vintages, but that's what I was doing in December was a series of like events and dinners for our 10th anniversary. So our first commercial vintage was 09. And so we opened everything, I think, through 21, and we did tastings, and we did this 2 days in a row. And I was blown away. 09, I didn't figure, because 09 was a bigger style for us. And I was not I was pleasantly surprised of how good everything was. The only, I don't want to say not a dog in the bunch, but was 2011, and that's really, and we've been fortunate enough there. It's really the only vintage that since we've been there that we had, kind of as a tough game for everybody down there, and that was really the only wine that was showing a little, a little wear around the edges, but the rest of them were spot on. So I was pleasantly surprised, and I've had some older Felton Roads that have been brilliant. When you step out of Central Otago, I've had some older Otorangis that have been brilliant. I mean, I haven't had a lot of older Pinot Noirs because we didn't see them here. You still don't see a lot of them here. So I don't have a ton of experience with old New Zealand Pinot Noir, but what I've had, it surprisingly can age. I mean, I would feel confident aging anything from us 15 years.
It's of course, you've got to have the patience to hang on to it for that long and not drink it beforehand. Which is always the challenge. It's not just a Pinot Noir story, though. You've got some Riesling as well. Is that right?
Yeah, we do. Yeah, we had this little back. We call it Bunny Gully because it was full of rabbits back in the day, and it's south. It's actually south facing slope. So Pinot Noir probably I wouldn't have made it there. I mean, all assuredly. So we were trying to figure out what should we plant there. I think it's about a hectare and a half. And Ted, if anybody is familiar with Literai and his experience with Chardonnay, Ted makes literally in my books the best U.S. Chardonnay bar none. And so I was like, well, Ted, I mean, your Chardonnays are killer. I mean, granted, we're starting to plant in 2003, and he looked at me and he said, Marcus, he said, does the world need? I don't know if I can cuss on this. Another effing Chardonnay is what he told me. So I'm like, well, that's a good point. We probably do. The world doesn't need another Chardonnay. So I was always it started with me as a Gruner Veltliner fan, and I was a huge Gruner fan from Austria. And I kept trying to get Rudy Bauer, who's an Austrian guy who owns Quartz Reef, to figure out how to smuggle Gruner Veltliner back from Austria on one of his trips and bring it in because it wasn't available in New Zealand. And then by the time we did all this, and it became available then through the nurseries, and Ted had done consulting, I think in the Wachau in Austria. And he said, Riesling and Gruner will ripen side by side. And I do love both those whites. And so we just went for it and basically split the land in half and planted half Gruner and half Riesling. Yep, that's it. And the first vintage, we just didn't have enough to make of either varietal. So we were like, well, mother's necessity eventually. We were like, screw it, let's blend them. So we started blending them, and we haven't stopped blending them because it's hard. It's a wine that's hard to describe, but it's just, and I don't think now we make so little of it, and with the popularity of it, I don't think we will ever, I don't want to say we won't, we'll ever separate them out. I think it's always going to be a Riesling. It's about a 50-50 blend, Riesling, Gruner, Veltliner.
It's become an iconic wine alongside of those.
I get asked for it all the time. People are like, well, are you ever bringing the wine over? I'm like, we're making like 500 6-packs. I'm like, it's like, I can't, we didn't bring it to last year was the first year that we ever brought that wine to the US, and we brought, I think, 15 cases or something like that. Yeah.
I'm sure they didn't last very long.
No.
So the Riesling is great. We make some in South Africa as well, but its spiritual home is a different part of the world, and that would be Germany. Yep. And is there a German project that you guys are involved with as well? Yeah, there is one. So we're my family. We own Kohler Ruprecht in the Rheinpfalz now, and it was just because, it kind of stumbled onto. It came through. We represent the Skurnik book, and it came through Michael Skurnik, and I mean it was up for sale, and for whatever reason it just was not burned, didn't have any heirs, and it just was, nobody was really circling around to buy it, and we're like, well, we stepped in. It's like, okay, it's a great property, great wines, and a unique style. So yeah, that just sort of fell into place too, probably, and I don't know when that was, maybe 2007, something like that. There's obviously an itinerant gene in the Sauvage family tree. Somewhere. Yes, there is. Gone from Kansas to Australia, dropped in New Zealand, now in Germany. It seems like the missing piece of the puzzle, Marcus, is a little wine estate in South Africa. Yeah, hey, you never know. Oliphant's River is calling my name. Which leads me to ask about South Africa and how you see it in America. You obviously visited here, you've got friends here, you know a lot of the wine. From the people you're sending wine out to in places like Colorado and Texas and the areas in which you distribute, it's a very broad question, certainly. But what is for you the general understanding, appreciation of South African wine and the markets you're working with?
I think it's getting there. To be painfully honest, I think it's like New Zealand. I think New Zealand's a little bit ahead of it. I think it's not well understood here at all. I know. I mean, I guarantee you, actually, if people would know, they'll know Parl Stellenbosch, but the like Oliphants River or like where Hamilton Russell is. I can never pronounce that. The Himmel and Yard or whatever that is. Areas like that, people just don't have any idea. But once they taste the wines, my experience has always been it's kind of the same way as New Zealand. They taste them, it's like, oh my God, that's really good. And it's like, and we're, when you know them, you're kind of like, well, yeah, of course it is. I mean, to me, it's like, well, that even Sadi made that. It's a great wine, but they don't know who, most of them don't know who even Sadi is and don't know wines like that. It's coming. And I think there's work being done, to get there, but it's not there yet. But I think knock on wood, I think it will get there.
In terms of speeding that process up, you're distributing a lot of wine. What generally do our South African producers need to do a little better to ensure that we make the most of the opportunity that might be there in America?
Oh boy, that's a great question. I think that from an American perspective, and I know this isn't fair, and I don't know why it is. I think most Americans see South African as a red wine and not a white, and it's probably from the old days of Pinotage. And me personally, I know there's a lot of people have problems with Pinotage. I don't. I mean, Kennecott Pinotage is one of the better wines I've ever had in my entire life. I love that wine. So, but I think for a lot of people, it's kind of like that Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc thing. There was, Pinot Noir. Pinotage is what South Africa was known for. And it kind of, I think at the same time that it, solidified the industry, it kind of shot itself in the foot a little bit, maybe over here, because I think there were some, bad ones here and at the time. And I think it got associated a little bit. And I think I don't think it is anymore. I don't think any people really understand what Pinotage is even. So, I don't want to say stick to red wines, but I just think that's what what it's known for and what sells over here more than a South African white.
And then by extension, if we look at the South African market, we're having this conversation with Brewer Raats a little earlier today, similar conversation with a couple of winemakers last week. There was a time when a lot of South African winemakers were going full Robert Parker and trying to make wine that you could beat people over the head with. And it was all new oak and big and broad shoulders and full of energy. And there's a lot more restraint to a red wine, a lot more style and elegance without losing the complexity and the substance. And I think personally it makes a better winemaking. It's a style that's being appreciated. What are people drinking in America? What do they like drinking, especially in that red space?
I think right now, that restraint thing, because of that Parker magnetism had such a hold on I think worldwide. So every wine you were getting was sort of like you said, wallop you over the head. And I think now people have become more used to the restraint in wines and more subtle wines. So I see that, and I don't think there's as much attention paid to the scores. I mean, there for a while, everything was just, I think it was again worldwide. I mean, it's just, and it almost doesn't matter. I mean, Parker was, wine inspector or wine advocate was the big guy doing it, but it was like nobody ever, and I mean, Parker himself, rightfully so, she used to be like, okay, if I gave the wine a 96, read the notes of what I said about it, but nobody ever read the notes. They just saw, a shelf talker that said 96 points. It was like, oh, that's good for me. So I think now there's less attention paid to that. And there's definitely a more opened community or market for more subtlety and more subtle wines and more well-balanced wines.
Which hopefully we will continue to send to you in ever increasing numbers.
I can't see it. I mean, knock on wood. Again, I don't see it going back the other way. I mean, I could be totally wrong. I've been wrong before, so hell if I know. But I mean, I think it'd be a hard thing to reverse after. I mean, everybody's palate. I don't say everybody, but I mean, even I look at my own palate. I mean, I'm not against Australian wine whatsoever. But back in the day when I was, mid 90s, first getting into wine, I was in the Master Sommelier program. And I mean, I loved like those, at those times, those big Australian Shirazes were so big. And some of them were like 16, 17% alcohol. And then you just sort of like, I mean, because you're drinking those things, you just realize you can't, they're hard. I mean, they can't drink that much of them. And for a drinker like me, that's a problem if I can't finish the bottle. So it's like, it was like, I think you just graduate into, the more you experience and the more you pay attention and taste different wines of the world. And you're also, well, there's other things out there. And I think everyone's palate shifts naturally to that. Or maybe it's age. I'm an old fart, so maybe that's it. I don't know.
I think it's just an increasingly brilliant palate because
maybe
it matches.
That's it.
Yeah. Wines coming in from New Zealand, wines coming in from South Africa. There are the classic European countries. But then, of course, there is the wine from home. And the wine that we're seeing from America, not just from Napa or Sonoma, but wine popping up from places like Texas and Virginia. It seems to be a local industry that is both in a very exciting phase, but also quite an adventurous one.
I think, if I remember correctly, I think there's wine made in, so there's 50 states in the U.S. I think it's made in every state, but Alaska, it's not made in 2 states. And one of them is Alaska, I know, and I can't remember what the other one is. And I mean, I honestly, with wines outside of like sort of the mainstream regions, or mainstream states of California, Oregon, Washington. I mean, I would call those the mainstream sort of like producers. I mean, New York has the Finger Lakes and Long Island. That's probably second. And there's there's great Rieslings being made there out of the Finger Lakes across into Niagara Peninsula in Canada. There's all sorts of great old school, or it's our old world wines of Cab Franc, Pinot Noir, Chardonnay, Riesling being made in Niagara Peninsula. And it's, again, they're not well known or understood. So they're usually, like for us in Colorado, we represent some Colorado wineries, and they're very good wines, but they have a hard time gaining traction outside of the state. I don't want to say they're viewed as novelties, but they haven't garnered a following nationwide yet in most of those states.
On sheer quality, according to the palate of Marquis, how good are they? And is there a noticeable improvement on, say, a decade ago?
Oh yeah, by far. I think a decade ago, most of these, again, the only one that I really have a lot of experience with is Colorado. And my former partner sold out of our original distribution business there, moved to the western slope of Colorado to grow peaches. They're Palisade peaches. They're very, very well known in the U.S. They're great peaches. And he, Scott High is his name. And he started then planting grapes and making wine. And so, yeah, they've become dramatically better. I think people were just sort of, back in the day, were screwing around in any of these states. And now they have become serious ventures. And people, for a local market, I think they have a lot of traction and can gain a lot of traction.
It's both a fascinating and a slightly intimidating market when you're trying to learn about wine from afar and you've just got your head around a bit of Napa and you suddenly discover there's wine and
I mean, even somebody like me that's, born and raised here and sets here. I mean, I don't know. I can't pretend to tell you that I know anything about most of the state. Like in Illinois, I know they make wine here, but I don't know anything about it. I can't name you one. Some of them, like when they're here, they're classified as, well, if you're making wine, it could be a fruit wine too, as well. So you could be making, a cherry wine as well. Like across the lake here is Michigan, and they make some good wines in Michigan, but there's a lot of fruit wines too as well. But there are traditional vinifera grapes being made too as well, and some of them are bloody good. I've been blinded on some things where I've been like, Jesus Christ. I mean, there was one. It's probably been about 3 years ago. I got blinded on, and I got the grape. It was a Pinot Grigio, and I'm like, boy, I don't know where it's from though. And it turned out it was from Sandusky, Ohio, which is around the corner here. Not where you would ever think there would be any wine grapes planted whatsoever. So you never know, and you got to, and I think that's a lot of things with anything. If you can take your perception out of it, because as soon as, you see something like, oh, it's from, Virginia, you're kind of, I think everybody's going, oh, I don't want a wine from Virginia. But if you don't know that and it's great, then, who cares where it's from?
I'll throw in climate change, and in 5 years' time, we'll be talking to Marcus about his new wine estate in Alaska, which will be next on the list.
You never know.
Marcus, you're not our first American guest on the show. In fact, we've got quite a regular guest who pops up. We share a love of golf as well as a love of wine, and also a love of music. I'm not sure if he quite counts as heavy metal, which I know is your preferred space. Dave Farrell, who plays bass for Linkin Park.
Yeah.
And I think what struck up our friendship, myself and Dave, was discovering that after he's finished a concert, he doesn't break up his hotel room and throw the TV out the window and jump into a jacuzzi with half a dozen lingerie models, but he actually sits back with a nice bottle of Pinot Noir, which puts him very high in my esteem. What are we drinking, if indeed we can, with the kind of heavy metal that you and your friend Simon Crawley are both fans of?
You had to get Simon on that one, didn't you? Yeah, Simon and I don't know. I can't. Maybe Simon will remember. I don't know if Simon meant if we meant over heavy metal or wine. I'm not even sure which one we meant over. But we're both fanatics about both. And yeah, the whole heavy metal scene. I mean, well, to me, they have to drink Burnt Cottage. That's what they need to do. So I was a kid growing up in the '80s. I mean, I was a huge heavy metal fan, and now because of wine, I've gotten to know some of these guys, and I hang out with them at times and go to dinner, because I think the old days, like you said, the days of models and lingerie and cocaine and bottles of vodka are gone. And they're all, I mean, not all of them, but a lot of them are serious wine guys and love wine, know their wine, love to talk about it. So it's a very interesting space nowadays of like, I remember when I first started doing that, I thought it was going to be like Motley Crue. We're backstage and we're all, going crazy, and it's very reserved. Like you said, like it's just a bottle, open some wine, hang out. And I just like, not dropping names, but was at Monomarth and Ghost, and Tobias from Ghost is really, he's really into wine, very much getting into wine, wants to learn about it. So I just took him a smattering of stuff from around the world and left it for him. And he's been giving me reports on what he's thought about stuff. So yeah, it's very interesting.
Rock stars and wine. It's a growing combination. We had a really interesting exercise, I think it was about a year ago, where music and wine were paired together to see how they worked in terms of arousing the senses. If you go back to those bands of the 80s, pick us a band or possibly even a song, and then a bottle of the wine you produce that you think might make for a great combination that I can look out for, possibly with my heavy metal loving wife.
Oh, geez, that's a good question. Well, sure, you got a heavy metal loving wife. Well, that's a good man. Let's see. We have another vineyard called Sauvage Vineyard that we purchased. It's on Felton Road. It's right across the street from Felton. And we're doing a single vineyard there. I don't know. Alex Dale brings our wines into South Africa, and I don't think he's got the Sauvage Vineyard. But if you can find it, Burnt Cottage Sauvage Vineyard. And I mean, my favorite band from back in the day and still yet to this day is Metallica. And the song's very overplayed now, but back in the day, boy, I mean, my friends and I just would go nuts to Seek and Destroy. So Seek and Destroy by Metallica and a bottle of Burnt Cottage Sauvage Vineyard Pinot Noir.
Sounds like a great
combination. And a lot of those wines have been raised on heavy metal because the winery has been blaring at times with different heavy metal playlists. And it's interesting because heavy metal is viewed as so underground, and we have guys, we have kids coming from all over the world to work, in the winery. And I mean, there's always a bunch, and it's like South Africa, France, there's always a bunch of metalheads that are working harvest. So it's very interesting.
Well, the stars clearly aligned today, because on the way to school, I had the kids listening to Enter Sandman as we drove through the school gates.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yes, you got to start remembering. My oldest are 24 and 23, and they both love it. And I mean, the only reason is because I did the same thing, like taking them to school. I mean, it was always on, and they talk about it now, and I didn't realize how much they were paying attention. And I mean, both of them are like Iron Maiden fans, and I'm like, I didn't realize I was even playing Maiden that much. And they're like, yeah, you were playing Maiden a lot. I'm like, oh.
Oh,
We
it
take
sounds like
it to our t-shirts even, if you can see that. We kind of metal up our t-shirts even, and yeah.
oh dear, it's all part of this wonderful Burnt Cottage story that you have, and there's so many great elements to it, and it's enormously fun talking about it. And we'll have to do it next time in person over a glass of wine.
Absolutely, yeah. I got to get down. I want to get back there. I mean, I've done some. I love South Africa. I've done, and I have had not the amount of time that last time I saw Simon, he was living in Brazil, so I saw Simon in Brazil. I've seen Alex last time I was in South Africa. He wasn't there, but I hung out with Alex and some winemakers, Paul Kluver and stuff. So I love going down there, but I haven't had much time for the wine because I went on safari once, and I brought my kids back on safari, and then the last time I was over by the Himmel in Yard, right? I mean, we did the cage diving with freaking great whites, which, I mean, that was just insanity. That is literally nothing. I have never seen anything like that in my entire life. I don't know if I want to ever again either, and it was rough and cold and everybody's puking. I wasn't puking somehow, but anyway, so I'd like to come back and do more of see some more of the food wine scene, some more of I haven't seen like a lot of the wine regions of South Africa. So one day for sure.
Well, there is plenty to explore, as there's plenty for me to explore. I'm going to be in New Zealand in the first part of next year, hosting the Laureus Challenge. I'll be doing some exploring. I might even get the chance to stick my head in at Burnt Cottage. Whether I do, whether I don't, though, I would like to know what the vision is for now. You've built up space in Germany, space in New Zealand. You've got the businesses in America. For Burnt Cottage in particular, though, where do you see the next 5-10 years?
Well, we're so small, really, in the scheme of things. I mean, we don't really have enough. I mean, fortunately, our demand out exceeds our supply. So we've got Burnt Cottage, we've got the original vineyard, we've got, like I mentioned, Sauvage Vineyard, and then now we have just purchased another. It's tiny though; it's 2 hectares on right on the corner. If anybody's familiar with it, the Felton Road and Bannockburn. So we've got another 2 hectares there that our original vineyard manager, Jared Connolly, laid out. It's all going to be biodynamic. And so that'll get us maybe to, between that 9,000-10,000 case level. We'd like to get a little bit more. I mean, our goal is to be like 12 or 15,000 case level. And then, so our Moonlight Race, which you showed the picture of, is our second label. And that's a blend. I mean, I don't like the term second wine, but I guess technically it is a second wine. Everything's done the same in the vineyard and the winery. But when we do blending trials, anything we don't think that makes the estate wines the best they can be, we put them in a blend called Moonlight Race. So it's less expensive, and even though everything's done the same way, so we'd like to boost that up and get to 12, maybe 15,000 cases. And we need to, if we do that, we need to build a winery. Our wine, I mean, if you see Burnt Cottage, we're made in a steel Quonset, what we call it. It's a shed. It's basically a 3-bay steel building that we have rigged out. It's like it's got it's all kitted out, as they would say in New Zealand, and all the gear, but it's a steel shed. So, and we're at capacity of probably 10,000 cases. It's just chocker block full.
Well, some of those cases do occasionally make their way to South Africa. Watch this space. We're going to see if we can sneak a few of them onto the Dan Really Likes Wine store.
Maybe if Alex is listening.
Well, we'll send through a message. Marcus, we'd also love to have you out. Come and host you in the Dan Really Likes Wine cellar, get you to a rugby match, awesome. Get you to a few vineyards.
Awesome.
And my wife has the good and the bad. She loves heavy metal. She doesn't drink Pinot Noir. I'm working on the second part. But we'll make sure we've got the playlist ready for you.
Awesome.
And some South African wine for you to sample. It'd be an absolute pleasure to have you over.
That'd be great. I appreciate the offer. I'm the guy who will take you up on it at some point in time. Trust me.
Please do. Mark, it's been lovely getting to know you today on the show. It's a really cool story. And I think there's a sense of adventure to most people in the wine industry, but yours is particularly keen. And it's been fantastic sharing a little of it. And we await the chapter marked Marcus and Dan hang out drinking wine in South Africa.
Cool, man. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much indeed. Marquis Sauvage, globe-trotting wine aficionado. Burnt Cottage, the headline act in New Zealand, making some exceptional Pinot Noir from the Otago Valley, but also some Riesling in Germany, and sending wine out across a number of states in America for a fairly comprehensive wine business. It's come a long way from farming in, I think it was down in Kansas somewhere. But lovely addition to the show, and a great way to add a touch of New Zealand to Rugby Week as we build up to the semi-finals this weekend. Look out next weekend, something rather special for the final at the Old Oak at Royal Johannesburg. I'll let you know about that on Monday. We won't tempt fate just yet with the semi-finals to come, but I do hope I will see you next Monday when the show comes to you live from Norman Goodfellows with, amongst others, Gerard Holden from Holden Mance, and we're going to try and rope the beast in from France to Nan Torreira, the Springbok World Cup winning prop, who now has his own range of wine as well. We'll see if he can join us amongst one or two others. That wraps us up for today. I'm off to get dinner ready for Barrera Rath's. A nice vegan dinner I think he'd absolutely love. Have a great evening. Huge thank you to Marquis Sauvage. Go and have a look at that Burnt Cottage, and keep an ear open. We might just have some good news for you on some wine made by a rock and roll loving American, producing it out of Otago, and hopefully finding its way to South Africa. Have a great evening. Enjoy the rugby on Saturday. Goodbye.